Hey everybody, this is Todd Linder with LaunchPoint, and in this interview, I'm talking with Jake Bell, and I am very excited for him to share his story, going from multiple different ministry positions in multiple different places to transitioning out into multiple different marketplace jobs. So he's not just in his first job out of ministry. He didn't just spend one job in ministry. So he's got a really, really cool story as well as just a lot of different experiences along the way. So I'm very, very excited for him to share that with you. So, Jake, thanks so much for being here with me today, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Absolutely. So, just fill us all in, starting with what was your journey into ministry and what were some of the roles that you had?
I think my journey in ministry really started while I was in college. I was attending Georgia State University, just getting a normal business degree and wasn't loving it. I was super involved at the church that I was attending in Atlanta, doing a little bit of contract work and some just like volunteer stuff on the side, and really grew excited and a passion for what I was doing in that kids ministry. It opened doors for opportunity to do anything from pack goldfish to prepare crafts to leading up to hosting and writing and communicating messages to elementary aged kids. Around my sophomore year of college, I decided I was going to leave Georgia State and pursue a full-time degree in kids and family ministry with Liberty. So I finished my undergrad at Liberty University online, and got my degree in kids and family ministry. From there, I graduated and took a job in Austin, Texas at a church where I was a family pastor along with another guy as well. And so we kind of tag team. I had the older age elementary kids. He had the younger age. And it was a really exciting time, different than what I expected, where I found myself, all the things that I had learned as far as like writing curriculum and planning and prepping for what Sundays looked like had a little bit of a different turn at this church, where I found myself mostly just greeting people at the door and printing coloring sheets. So it was a very different experience, but also a great launching pad for me to, leave hometown, leave the church that I was connected to the most, to go and actually like step into ministry full time on my own as an adult. So it was a really great learning period. From there, I was there for about 3 years, and then I made some connections to another church that I had some friends who were working at. I had connected with online, and applied and moved out to work with them. I joined one of their campuses as their kids director and oversaw that area. So leading a team of like 800 volunteers, three different experiences that happened across the weekend, a lot of different events, different things like that. Again, different than what I ever expected it to look like. Again, when I stepped into ministry, I thought I was going to be doing what I had done while I was just like working contracts, which was writing curriculum, communicating, doing different things like that. But it was very different. A lot more behind the scenes work, which I ended up loving. But was with that ministry for 3 years as well before I was bringing my daughter into the world and realized we wanted to be closer to family. And that lifestyle wasn't necessarily sustainable for what my wife and I wanted for our family. So we decided, hey, let's move back closer to where our family is back in Georgia. And we decided to make that move 3 years into that second ministry job. And here I am now, a year and a half out of ministry, in my second marketplace job.
Okay, man, love that story, and it sounds like even from high school, you knew you really loved being in the church and being
Mhm.
around the church. And then once you got into college, you even made some pretty significant steps to
Mhm.
change, leave proximity to family, leave
Yeah.
proximity uh, to like what like made sense probably to a lot of people around you, did
Yep.
online school, moved out to Texas. So you took some pretty big steps, which I would imagine, and I want to hear a little bit more about this. That would that would take either be risky or a really, really huge heart for being a part of ministry and family ministry specifically. Tell me a little bit more about how that decision making process went down for you to
Yeah.
leave a like normal state university, go to essentially a Bible college. I know Liberty is
Yeah.
a university, but you're getting a Bible degree, and then moving halfway across the country.
Yeah. I think it was both a bit of a risk, but also something that I had a heart for as well. I was ready to go, excited to do it. It was more so like my family, I had to convince like, hey, it's okay to not have a business degree as a backup. I didn't want to finish my business degree. I knew that I wanted to go straight into ministry, and my family wanted that for me as well. But they wanted to make sure I wasn't making a risky like spur of the moment type of decision because it felt easier. Like and a lot of people I think would say like going to ministry school and working at a church was going to be easier than like getting my master's degree in business and going to find like a corporate 9 to 5 job. And so I think it took a little bit of convincing and also a big risk because I'm telling my family, hey, I'm going to, move out and go across the country, like you said, and work in Texas at 19, 20 years old. And so I did have a big heart for it as well. And that's why I knew and was confident in making that decision. I also had a lot of growing up to do as well. And so going and stepping into ministry allowed me to do that because I had mentors that I was able to talk to and process this with. They were like, hey, this is not going to be easy. This is actually going to be very challenging. On top of the personal like fears that I had to kind of face as well, which was like living on my own and figuring out like a whole new city and being long distance from the relationship that I was in, and just figuring out all those different aspects on top of also carrying the weight of stepping into ministry, which is again very different than what you are learning even in ministry school because what happens in the textbook doesn't always happen in person. And so there were just a lot of factors to it. But I think you summed it up perfectly saying, like, one, it's a big risk, but two, there was a lot of heart behind it that made that decision um, like one that was very thought out, but also one I was able to take with a lot of confidence.
Yeah. So if we're really adding everything up, including your contract work, your 3 years in Austin, your 3 years at the second church that you worked for, you probably had 8 to 10 years of
Yeah,
actually like getting paid by a church, being a part of
right.
family ministry. So that's it's not like you got your 4 year degree, you worked for a church for a few years and then you moved on. Like you spent considerable time
Mhm.
employed at a church and in one form or another, and you had this big heart for it, obviously, but then you did make a change. Tell me a little bit
Yeah.
about why you hinted at it at the beginning, but expound for me a little bit more about why you ended up making that change.
Yeah, it's hard because I still to this day, almost 2 years out of being in ministry, I'm like, should I go back? But it's because I have a heart for it. And
Totally.
I don't think you lose passion for like kids or connecting people or small groups or outreach. I don't think you lose that. So I still to this day ask myself that question of like, oh man, but I think that that decision really came down to what was sustainable for me and my family. My wife and I, we actually both worked at the second church that I was at. She was working doing social media and marketing for the worship department. I was working for a physical location and then actually transferred to the online location come 2020, where I was able to help kind of build an online kids ministry where really no other church was able to do that. So on top of it being a passion of mine and something that like I was able to build, it became my baby. But then I was having a real baby and I wanted to make that transition and do something that was going to be more sustainable for me and my family, which I knew my wife desired to be closer to family. I wanted to be closer to family. We wanted our daughter to be closer to family. And unfortunately, working weekends and holidays being really what you prepare for Christmas, Easter, New Year's celebrations, baptisms, child dedications, all of those happen over the weekend. So when we really laid everything out and we said, what is this going to look like for our family in the future? Unfortunately, ministry wasn't there. Then we started having conversations of like, okay, well, does that mean that like our calling or this passion that we felt like God gave us has disappeared? And we again sought counsel on that and realized, no, but there are seasons in your life where things are going to shift and change. But like my ministry is now not showing up to church on a Sunday morning. It's my wife, it's my daughter, it's like my mental state. My ministry is caring for those things and those people just as important as it was to step in to a staff role and put on a name badge and welcome kids into an environment as well. And so ministry for me just looks different now than it did when I was doing it as a job that I was being paid for. So ultimately that was the decision and the shift that I needed to make, which was going from, the weekend responsibility to still an everyday responsibility, just not within the four walls of a physical church building.
Man, there's so much wisdom packed into what you just said about that your ministry to your family can be just as important as if you have the name badge or you have a W-2 that's connected
Yeah.
to a specific church. Did you just come to that on your own? Were you reading books or listening to podcasts? Were you talking to people? How did you, because there's two parts of this that I'd love to hear more about. There's the one, like,
Mhm.
it feels like the very practical side of this, like
Right.
weekends, nights, that's just not going to work super well. But then there's the more heart side of this, which is, are we doing less? Are we losing our calling? Are we
Mhm.
stepping out of God's will by making this decision? So help me understand a little bit about how you went about processing those things and maybe where you went, if you went anywhere, for wisdom and guidance on that.
Yeah, totally. I think first I would say like one, it wasn't an easy decision to make because on weighing out those options, you go, do I instantly lose my community? Do I lose the like, the years of connectivity that I've created with all of these different people and this place and these emotions and these moments that you really built like this lifestyle around? Because I mean, in ministry, you hear all the time that like, it's not a 9 to 5, it's all the time and it doesn't stop. You're always on, your phone's ready, like whatever it might be, like you've just kind of got to be ready. And so you kind of have to like wrap your mind around almost mourning that like that feeling of like being needed. And so I did start having conversations with some
Wow.
different like mentors and
Yeah.
people in my life to say like, hey, what was this like for you guys going from, step like full-time ministry to stepping down to doing something else or just being with your family? Because my wife and I both really struggled with what that decision was going to look like. Thankfully, my wife did step down after working at the church for 2 years and went and got a job working at an agency, and that honestly gave me a lot of confidence, and I am grateful that she did that,
Cool.
like, first because, we were like it gave me a lot of peace knowing, like, hey, she stepped away and kept all of her friends. She stepped away and was still able to come to church, and it wasn't awkward. She stepped away and was still able to be connected, and so as I was there for another year, I was even questioned a lot of like, "Hey, when are you leaving next?" And it was like, "No, I'm here. I don't have any other like, you know, thing that I'm looking after or wanting to go do until obviously, came my daughter." But when that time did come, I did start to have those feelings again of like, what is this going to be like? And so I had conversations outside so that there were no feelings or emotions attached to the actual place, and got the wisdom of like, hey, you've got to do what's best for your family. That's what comes first. And then again, wrestled a lot with it because as I started having conversations internally, you begin to hear the same things over and over of like, well, like, why would you want to go anywhere else? Look at all of the amazing benefits that come with being at a place like this, like you're not going to get the opportunity to travel as much as you do, or like what about the music releases or the big events or this or that. And I don't think any of it was to be like manipulative or try to like make you feel a certain way so that you don't leave, but really helping you see like, hey, this was a life decision that you made. Why is that no longer the decision you want for your life? And I was like, I think that that's a little bit harsh to ask somebody. And so um because, and I say it's harsh to ask somebody because they're not also processing through the lens of I'm about to be a father. I still have like a family I've got to care for. Like there are things outside of the church that although they say, and this is everywhere, although they say that they tend to and they pay attention to, aren't always present. And so when I bring these concerns of like, hey, I want to be there for my family, I need more time, I can't travel as much, rather than being like, hey, we totally understand, you're met with opposition of like, right, but can you imagine how many people would love to be in your position and travel? And it's like, I also want to be at home with my family. And so it ultimately did lead to the decision of moving. So to sum that up, yes, I did talk to people outside who had no connection to that church, to make sure that I wasn't making a rash decision or an emotional decision. But then I also did want to be respectful to the place that did take a chance on me and welcome me in and allow me to be a part of building a ministry that was reaching people all over the world and say, hey, this is how I'm feeling. I know you guys trusted me. I want to trust you. And there were some hard conversations. There were broken relationships. And I was able to voice those things as well. And that was hard. But it was also very telling and confirming to the fact that like I did make the right decision of making that transition. And yeah, it was tough, but it was worth it.
And one thing you said, I mean, all of that was so helpful. And I love the way that you approached that and walked through it. And I can tell is that you were able to begin to separate what's important to you from what's important to other people. And in ministry, that's really hard to do sometimes because other
Mhm.
people see the church or ministry or their vocation as like, this is it. Like, this is my personal calling. This is where God has me. But then sometimes they don't understand, well, why doesn't God also have you there? Like, why aren't you called to the same thing? And you were able to have that separation, which is
Mhm.
really, really healthy to discern, no, what is God actually calling me to? And it sounds like a part of that is to have community, or at least to have guidance or advice from people who are not connected to the church you're connected to, but also love you enough and have wisdom and have your best interests in mind and love Jesus
Right.
to help you see, maybe, like, let's look at this objectively. Um, man, I think that's so important. And even goes to, you got to have friends outside of the church you work for.
Right. It's
You
true.
can't sit in the echo chamber, and even the congregation, people that come to the church that you work for,
Right.
or are on the board of the ministry that you work for. You got to have friends outside of that, because then you'll just get in this echo chamber and it'll be really hard to make sense of everything.
Yeah.
Man, there was so much good stuff there. Anything you add to that before I ask the next question?
Yeah. I think it's important to recognize too, and this is why my wife and I have been able to keep such a healthy relationship to where we were, is because we realized there was nothing wrong with the church. There was nothing wrong with the people. There was nothing wrong with the teaching, the worship, the heart, the meaning behind it. It was simply a personal decision that we were making for ourselves. And when we realized that, every conversation, every decision that we made, we were able to make in confidence, knowing that like this wasn't in spite of someone, something, or the ministry itself. It was simply because like we were stepping into a new stage of life that we felt that God wanted us to be fully present for, which was parenthood. And I didn't want to be the parent that, like I want my kid to grow up in church, but I didn't want my kid to just like be dropped off in at church for 8 hours a day because or on the weekend because that was what our routine was. When really like my wife and I weren't even getting to do church together because she was off running social media. I was in these hallways running a kids ministry. I wanted us to be able to do church together. Granted, we can talk about this at another part, but it's like it's hard to even go to church now on the other side of it. But all of that to say, the decision wasn't made like out of emotion or out of spite or out of anything negative towards that place, which I think has made it very healthy for us to still have respect and connection and be able to, be there. We've even gone back to visit friends and gone to the service, and it's all been amazing. But that's because we were able to really just hear and take those steps in confidence.
Yeah, and that's so amazing. Something that you hit on, which is something that I always take our clients through, is you have to understand what your personal values are and
Sure.
articulate them, and then look at the values of the people or the organization that you're around, and just compare them and just look at them. And they're neither is bad, neither is good necessarily. They just are what they are. And you look, and if they're different, you're like, okay, these are my values, and this is how I'm
Yeah.
going to make those decisions. And that sounds like exactly what you did. Um, so let me change gears a little bit. As you were
Yeah.
thinking about making the change, moving, different type of job, were you looking at ministry jobs in different contexts? Were you looking at other churches, or did you know, oh, this is I like my time in ministry, at least for right now, is finished and I need to go get a different type of job?
Mm. Yeah, so it was interesting because we were very much on a timeline, right? Because obviously we had a due date when our daughter was going to be born, and we knew we wanted to be at home by that time. And so we just started looking at anything that I could. Obviously, I naturally gravitated towards like I know I could get another church job. I could find a job, whether that be in events or guest experience or kids ministry, something along those lines. Online ministry, because everybody was still doing that at like it was still really hot at the time, and so I naturally gravitated towards those options. But I did have this like excitement towards like trying something new and different because of being 28 years old. I was making this decision at 26, 27. Like I knew that I wanted to maybe try something different. And so that's when I fell into a little bit of confusion and frustration, but also a little bit of like regret because I was like, oh man, did I make a life decision back in college that set me up for
Wow.
failure moving forward? Never anticipated I
Wow,
wouldn't be
man.
working in ministry ever in my life. And so here I am with 9 years of this ministry experience, a lot of really great on the road, online, in person, across the country, in the country, like, I mean, you name it, I've probably done it somewhere at some church. And so I'm like, how do I translate that into real world terms that like are going to make a secular job or a 9 to 5 job or a marketplace job or whatever you want to call it hire me? And so I started looking at these things that were saying like, well, we want, 4 years of experience here or 3 years of experience doing this. And I'm like, I have that, but I don't think they're going to quite understand because I'm saying it's from this church. And they're like, yeah, you did that at a church. It's not the same thing as an agency. That's not the same thing as my business. That's not the same thing as this or that. And so I started to get super insecure of like, I've got nothing to go off of here. And so then I started looking at options of like, do I go back to school? Do I have to get another degree? Like, what is going to make me qualified for these people to even want to have a conversation? And that's when my wife was like, hey, what you got to do is write down your experience and then see how can separate these into buckets of things that translate into real life experiences. Not saying that ministry is not real life, but we do get stuck in using terms and language that is very churchy that are hard to understand or relate to if you haven't been within that culture. And so I looked at things like I went to event planning, project management, communications, marketing, email marketing, all of those different types of things. Then you go to admin work, and the list goes on and on. And so that really like kind of gave me the confidence in then searching for jobs. I also started thinking of where did I want to go and who did I know in those places and what businesses were in those places that I could make personal connection to. So I instantly went back to, oh, where I was working contract, I had friends that worked at this company. I'm going to reach out to them and see if they're hiring because that gives me a little bit of credibility on top of the experience that I also have. So it really was this like beautiful mind map of like, where am I going? Who do I know there? What business is there? And then how have I translated all of my ministry experience into a marketplace experience as well?
Man, you, I think, encapsulated so well at the beginning of that. the feelings that so many people have, whether it's regret, like, did I get the wrong degree? Now I'm moving out here, the frustration with getting turned down, or people just not experience or not understanding what your experience means, or the also the frustration of like, I am well qualified to do this
Yeah.
job. Maybe I'm even overqualified to do the job that I'm applying for. Why can you not see that? And it's hard. And it's Christianese, right? Our
Yeah.
resumes are in Christianese. And I used this
Mhm.
analogy with someone the other day. I said, think of it in seminary terms. You are reading a translation from Hebrew to English, right?
Yeah.
So on your resume, are you going to ask that employer to learn Hebrew, or
Right.
are you going to translate it into English, or are you going to ask them to learn like Christianese or churchese, or are you going to translate it into marketing? Are you going to translate it
Yeah.
into event experience? So man, you said that so well and described that so well. Uh, if you could like specifically point to maybe like one or two specific challenges or specific moments. I know you already mentioned one or two.
Yeah.
What were some of like the biggest hurdles or biggest challenges that you encountered as you were going through this process?
Yeah. I'll give you a personal one and then like a professional one. Personally, I had a really hard time being a husband and an almost father trying to make a significant career shift and how that was going to either one, set my family back significantly, or was it going to set us up for success and the lifestyle that like we were on track of building and being a part of. And so that to me was a really
Are
big
you? Let me stop
hurdle.
you for a second. Is that was that like a financial thing you're talking about, like setting you
I think
back,
all the
or
above.
okay?
Yeah, all the above. Financially, because I mean, ministry, I don't think it's like any surprise to anybody that that is like a little bit on the lesser side of the financial spectrum than like a marketplace job. And so you already learn to be resourceful, but like generous at the same time. And so when you get comfortable with that salary, you know, anything else is very attractive. And so but I didn't want that to be a driving factor. But I was recognizing that like, okay, if these fears that I have of like, do I need to go back to school and get another degree? What if my job doesn't qualify me for like a senior or director level? What if I have to get an entry level job? Like does that set us back? You know, ministry is also very generous with their benefits and things like that, where like my whole family, including the birth of our child, was like fully covered by insurance. And there's different aspects of it that like I was fearful of going somewhere else and not having that same experience. And then looking back years down the road going, we should have stayed there because we're back to where we were when we were 22, just getting married, and we're trying to rebuild this whole thing, but we've also got another, you know, another head under the roof that we're trying to like care for at this time. And so that was a very big personal hurdle that I was trying to overcome, and the pride of it, right? Like I was like, cool, my wife is, you know, gonna work a remote agency job and make more money than I am. And that's great. And I cheer her on and champion her in that because she's incredible at it. But you know, as a husband and as a father, I wanted to be able to provide for my family, and I was fearful that the decision I was making was not going to allow me to do that. And then I also had to get over the fact that like I think there was a little bit of pride in me that was able to say I was working at that church. And I liked that my family was able to say, yeah, my son works at the church, and they were proud of me because I that was a good thing to do. And so going and working, you know, at another company or at another agency, like, are they going to be that proud to tell their friends or family, like other family members, like, yeah, did you see what Jake was doing this week at work? Because it's not baptizing kids anymore. I'm sending spreadsheets and writing emails. Like, but ultimately, like, I
Yeah,
think that
so
that
impressive.
like, but hey, what's more impressive is getting that time back with my family. That I can say. But I think that was a personal hurdle. The professional hurdle on the ministry side of things was I was afraid of disappointing and losing, like I said, the connection and the friends and the moments that I had built on and created over the years. And so that was something that I really wrestled with. And again, I don't think it's anybody else's fault but my own for allowing me to go back and forth on, like, is this like the peak of my career? Like the church that I was at, like, is wildly successful, which is kind of crazy to say in terms of ministry. But when it came to music and teaching and events and things like that, like it was right up there with, the best of the best. And so I was like, is this the best that I can get? Like when I was in ministry school, this is the top of my list of places that I wanted to work. So it was like almost that dream come true moment. And am I really going to walk away from that? And so having those conversations with people internally was really difficult because I didn't want to disappoint. I didn't want to create confusion. I didn't want to be told what I was doing was wrong. And that was really hard for me because I will say I was very good at my job, and I loved the people I worked with. I loved the families I worked with. Again, I loved the opportunities that I had. And I was fearful of what they would say and think about me. I was worried that, like, the kids I had made connections with across the country and in other countries were going to wonder, like, hey, where did this guy go that we had built a relationship with? There's a lot on the line because you become these people's safe place and you become somebody that they can trust. And I didn't want to just walk away from that and then wonder, like, if it wasn't what he was, like, selling himself out to, like, why are we going to be involved and invested in this thing if we're also not even there physically too?
Man, the way I'm so grateful for how you can articulate these things. I can tell you've done a lot of processing of all these different emotions, because it really is tumultuous internally
Mhm.
to go through this process and to think about everything that you lose
Right.
on top of, or everything you will lose. The grieving process is a whole another thing, but all the things you believe you will lose on top of all of the unknowns in front of you and all of the hurdles that we already
Right.
talked about with, what do I want to do? How am I going to explain that I'm qualified? How do I get that job? Um, Man, thank you so much for sharing that. I think a lot of people are going to resonate with that. So, really quickly, because we're running low on time, and I want to make sure that I respect your time well, Jake, this has been amazing. Tell us, where did you land in your first job after ministry? I know you mentioned, like, you knew people that worked at a place and
Yeah.
maybe they had an opening. And then where are you now in your job?
Yeah. So out of ministry, I landed a job with a company that was like close to home where I grew up, had connection to, and reached out and took a completely different career path as well. I took an HR role. And so I knew that I could project manage and I could connect with people. And I wanted to help people launch their career like somebody helped me do when I was back, serving, doing volunteer work and contract work under somebody else. I wanted to help open that door for somebody. So I was like, what a great opportunity. So I landed that role in HR and did that for about a year. And then from there, I took that experience on project management and emailing now in a marketplace job, not just in a ministry job, and was able to then say, hey, I've got this experience. I want to take it even further, and made a connection even internally with another agency and was able to make a shift a year later to now doing social media and marketing for an agency. So I'm now in my second job out of ministry, which is honestly crazy to even think because I'm like, I can't even say ministry was like, close to the past because I'm almost, 3 years out of it at this point. And so, yeah, I would say it was a fairly smooth transition from ministry to that first job doing HR, and then from HR now to doing social media and marketing at my current agency has been kind of my track.
Okay. I, Jake, I love this. And I want to point something out that's important that I just want to give people some perspective on is your first job out of ministry is not going to be like where you go for the rest of your life.
Oh no.
And yeah. And so if you're feeling the pressure, like you have to get the perfect job or you have to figure it out perfectly, some of it's process of elimination. Some of it's getting in the right spot that's going to set you up for the next spot. Some of it's just getting a little corporate uh, experience on your resume so
Yeah.
that you can say, it just makes a little bit more sense. Even your church experience makes a little bit more sense when you blend it all together like that. And
Right.
I know that's going to be discouraging for some people because they feel super qualified. This is exactly how I felt. Funny enough, when I left church, I had a very similar role to when Jake left church, and we made this connection when you were actually working at this company. We worked for the same company
Yeah.
after we transitioned out of church work in very similar roles in HR. And now neither one of us is doing HR. Mine's sort of
Yeah.
along those lines, but you transitioned to something completely different in an agency doing social media. So your
Yeah.
first job out of ministry does not have to be like the perfect job or the start of your career path moving forward.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
opportunities to flex. There's opportunities to discover. Yeah, that's super helpful. It sounds like what you were looking for was, I want to have more family time, which you do have more of that
Right.
time, but even picking some parallel cultures, not the same, but maybe
Right.
similar, like belief oriented, heart oriented cultures. Not that there's anything wrong with that necessarily, can still keep you a little stuck and maybe giving a little bit more. And that's your like value. Someone may not value that as much, but as a new dad and as a husband, that's what you're valuing. And so it's good to even think outside the box a little bit,
Yeah.
maybe to a company that like doesn't have the CEO's not a believer or something along those lines. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. Last question for you, Jake, and then I'll ask if you have just kind of like summing up one piece of advice. But how would you say that the transition from ministry into the marketplace has changed your life?
Yeah, I definitely think it has helped build confidence personally and professionally. That is something I have. That is like a word that I have. It's maybe a bit of a trigger word for me because it's like you do something like ministry, and there is a lot of uh, maybe a lot of smoke and mirrors of like, hey, we've just got to show up and we've got to make this look good. And I don't want to call it false confidence because I think that there is heart and passion and meaning behind it. But there is still a lot of like there there's a lot of it that's missing internally where it's like, all right, this is like something really hard for me to step into because it's a lot of weight to carry and there is a lot of responsibility and you are always on, but you still have to manage your personal life and finances and goals and passions outside of just church in like the day to day. And so I think this transition has changed my life and given me a lot more confidence personally because I have been able to actually give the time and attention that like I needed mentally, spiritually, emotionally to myself, to my family, to my daughter, to the things that I am excited about, like fitness and health and different things like that, where I didn't always get to have time for those things. And so I didn't even realize I was missing out on them until I started having these thoughts of like, hey, what could be after ministry? And so I would say it's honestly given me a lot of time freedom, a lot of emotional freedom, a lot of financial freedom. And with that to say, I'm not even like, even though I'm 2 jobs removed, I'm not even, rolling in the dough. My bank's not like busting out the seams or anything like that, but like it has given me this like this just sense of confidence overall that's allowed me to say like I was able to overcome something that I was fearful of, and that in itself is a really big like boost to the ego. And I mean that in a
Yeah.
whole way because I
Sure.
know that we don't want to get wrapped up in ego, but it's like, you know, like I've realized it's okay. And I was very
Yeah.
fearful that it wasn't going to be, and I didn't lose the friends. There were no bridges burned. Ultimately, like I was able to accomplish more time with my family.
Man, I love that. There's definitely something about doing hard things that boosts your confidence. There's something even
100%.
more about doing new things that are hard that boosts it even more. And I love that
That's
that
right.
on top of all of the time freedom, a little bit more financial freedom, uh, has been your experience. That's so awesome. Okay. One piece of advice, number one piece of advice for anybody who's thinking about trying to make that transition from ministry into a marketplace job, they're in the transition. What would you say to them as your number one piece of advice?
I would say you can transition from ministry to a marketplace job without it being a personal attack on the church. I think that so many people think that when you leave ministry, you can never go back to that church. You can never talk to the people again. You always have to like leave well, and there is a way to do that. But that doesn't mean that you have to, reveal all of the cards in your hand and show them everything that's happening. You are your own individual who can make a confident, wise decision that is best for you. I believe that if you are obedient and listening to the Lord and following what is put on your heart, if you are met with opposition that is outside of your control, and all you can do is approach it and face it confidently, and I think you will see on the other side of it that it was hard but very much beneficial, and you may not feel that for a long time, but you will eventually find that freedom in whatever it is that you might be looking for personally, spiritually, emotionally, physically, whatever that looks like for you. I think that you would find that. But ultimately, it is not personal. It is not like an attack on the place itself. It is simply a decision that you have made in your mind and you feel in your heart that you just want to act on, and that is okay.
Man, Jake, so much wisdom, so much insight, such an encouraging story, man. Thanks so much for spending time today. If somebody's
Yeah, thank
resonates with
you.
your story and they're like, I want to hear more or I want to talk to Jake, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn, or I mean, you can email me, call me, text me. I don't know. I'm open to chatting. I think maybe the best way would be you can just find me on LinkedIn. Um,
Cool.
I think that's a great way to connect. And if you don't hear from me on LinkedIn, then you can at least link to one of my other social channels, and we'll connect there.
Great. I'll make sure to tag Jake when we post this so that everybody knows
Perfect.
which Jake Bell in the world that we're talking about. Jake,
There
again,
you
thanks
go.
so much for your time, man. So great to see you. Great to
Thanks,
talk to
Todd.
you.